Welcome back to Morning Break. We have a special guest for today's Monday Motivations, brought to you by Gates Brain Health. Now, last month, you may recall that we had Reno author and chef Brooke Siem on the show to talk about her new memoir. That's right here. It is called May Cause Side Effects. And now we're going to continue that discussion on mental health from the perspective of someone who has been there herself. So, Brooke, seriously, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me back.
Now, you are a big advocate on not just mental health, but antidepressants and antidepressant withdrawal, because that is really the heart and soul of this book.
Yes.
You were on medication for about 15 years, came off of it, and it was kind of a disaster to start.
It was a huge disaster.
It was a huge disaster. So I think that's where we should begin today's interview. Can you talk about that time period and why it was so awful?
Sure. I was a kid when I was first put on antidepressants, and I just did what the adults told me to do, and I took a pill if I had a headache, and I took pills for what they told me I needed. And so it wasn't until I was 30 years old when I realized I had never had an unmedicated moment as an adult, and I was still suicidal and severely depressed, so something wasn't working here. And so I just decided, okay, I need to figure out how to get off these drugs and discover my baseline. But I went to a doctor who didn't know what she was talking about, and she pulled me off way too quickly, and I was plunged into severe antidepressant withdrawal, which wasn't something I had even heard about at the time.
Yeah, because I think when people think of withdrawal, they think of like alcoholism or some stronger drug like opioid or heroin or something like that. But withdrawal symptoms can kind of feel very similar when you're coming off of antidepressants, right?
Yeah, that's part of what was so tricky, is that antidepressant withdrawal, it's a chemical being taken away from your body really quickly, and it can have psychological symptoms, it can have physical symptoms, emotional symptoms, all these things that often can look like the relapse or a reemergence of either a new psychiatric disorder or a relapse of an existing one, when in reality it is just the fact that your brain and body is trying to readjust and normalize after being on what are very powerful drugs for a long period of time.
So how in the world did you go from that withdrawal season of your life to where you're at now, where you are happy and you're healthy and you're thriving?
I was really lucky in that I had support from my mom, who never ever thought I was broken. And so she would, if I thought I was broken or that like something was permanently wrong with my brain, she just knew in her core that that wasn't happening, and picked up the phone every single time and supported every decision I made. And that really helped from the outside. But I also got really angry because I started to realize that I had lived for my entire adult life completely numbed out, and I wasn't connected to myself at all. And when I started to get off these drugs, I started to feel a connection, like colors literally got brighter, and I started to get creative in a way I hadn't been. I had some like little moments of great things, and it just made me angry that I felt so robbed of that over the years. So that kind of, that anger really kind of motivated me to keep going when things got really bad. But I really couldn't have done it without the support of my mother, and then I also had counseling as well.
Yeah, and I know that anger has also propelled you to share your story. And I say anger, and like
anger.
Yes, it's a very productive anger, because you are using your story and knowing like what you were robbed of in the hopes that other people won't be robbed of the same thing. And so your message about how to go about coming off of antidepressants and the right ways and the wrong ways to do that, and it starts with really solid conversations with your doctor. You did not have a great experience with yours. What advice do you have for people who want to have that conversation with their doctors?
So people today are really lucky. People who want to get off their antidepressants are really lucky because there's information out there now, and there's some research out there that didn't exist when I went through this. So a lot of the research is based out of the UK. I would recommend that people look up something called hyperbolic tapering. And it's basically a dose reduction method that's really small over time, and there's research on it. There's a researcher named Mark Horowitz who does great work that explains in graphs and also the science and whatnot of like why this tapering method is less likely to create withdrawal symptoms. People also probably need to understand that pharmaceutical companies don't provide small enough doses of these drugs to naturally step down. So for me, part of the reason why I had to go cold turkey was because I was on the lowest dose of one of my drugs. And so in reality, what should have happened is that there are ways to make smaller doses through compound pharmacies, something called tapering strips, or even being at home, separating it out myself based on the plan that I had created with my doctor. But my doctor didn't know that, so she just said stop.
Wow.
And so I still had to have this really terrible experience. It's a long process. It requires a lot of patience, but you know, if you work with your doctor and create a plan, then everyone feels like they have a lot more control in the process and they're much more informed.
And I think that is so huge, and the ability for you to speak so eloquently and with such grace about your story. And I know it's very, very hard to talk about it because you're forced to kind of go back in time to a time that you're like, if I never have to live that again, great, you know? And so I understand that. So thank you so much for sharing your story. And now one final platform opportunity for you is just to speak to maybe somebody who might be listening right now, who might be feeling, you know, the depression and the anxiety and don't even know how to feel about what they're feeling. What advice do you have for them?
Well, I think that we're in a very precarious moment with the way we talk and treat mental health in this country, in that we very much view it as a permanent, lifelong thing that perhaps you have no control over. You know, the chemical imbalance theory, the idea that something is wrong with your brain, has really been drilled into our view of this, and it's incorrect. You know, this is a fluid thing. Our brains are capable of learning and changing, and as we change our environment and address the problems or the traumas that we've had, our brain will start to change and reflect a better world back to us. So the hardest step and the biggest step that people can make is really finding a way to believe and understand that this does not have to be the rest of your life, that there is always hope for recovery, that a beautiful life exists out there, and that people like me have done it. I've been at the worst place I could be, and now that feels like a foreign person. But it takes a ton of work. It takes a good team, and it takes resilience, and it's not fast. So if you can just look at it as like, this is the work of your life, is addressing these things and helping to heal all the hurt. Then you're rewarded with a life you really want to live.
And I know we live in such a microwave world where we want that instant gratification, but you're talking about being in it for the long haul and never giving up hope. And hope is one of my favorite words of all time. So thank you so much for sharing hope, for sharing your story, Brooke. You are amazing. I love when you are on the show because I know that you are reaching, even if it's just one person, you're reaching that person to their soul. So thank you, Brooke, for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
We'll be right back after this quick break.